Hello and welcome back to Trilogy Month. Yes, we are now in the second Trilogy Month for this year, but also the third ever Trilogy Month. So, in case you don't know what Trilogy Month is, hello, welcome to the channel. Um, Last year I took on a challenge of for an entire month where I would review a new trilogy every week. So it would start with on the Monday for the first movie in that trilogy, Wednesday for the second, and third for the final one. So I've done that twice now. So yeah, this is the third time that I'm doing it. I decided to do it twice this year, just to see how it goes, because I do have fun doing this. I use Trilogy Month as a way to revisit some trilogies that I haven't watched in a while, maybe even give them a second go around, as well as also an excuse to actually watch a trilogy that I've never watched before, and to do it basically throughout the entire month. Some examples of trilogies that I've given a second chance to would be the Men in Black series. I was always a fan of Men in Black 1 and 2, not so much of 3, but when I sat down and rewatched them, I still love Men in Black 1, not so much Men in Black 2 now, because it's basically the same as the first movie, and I actually really enjoy Men in Black 3. I think it's actually an underrated gem. Um, and then as well, yeah, I get to experience trilogies that I've never got to before, such as the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Yes, until last year, I had never watched a Lord of the Rings film. Now I can, and I see the appeal to them. The same with early on this year when I went through the Christopher Nolan Batman trilogy. Hadn't seen a single one of them. Obviously, I've seen clips of them, but I hadn't actually sat down and watched one from beginning to end. And I did that with all three of them, and I get why a lot of people love Heath Ledger as Joker. Christian Bale was a good Batman. I really enjoyed him. Especially, I enjoyed how Christopher Nolan directed those films. So, this year, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, for this bout of Trilogy Month, we're starting off with Back to the Future, a trilogy that a lot of people hold near and dear to the heart. I mean, the franchise has been out for, it'll be 40 years next year. So 39 years this film has been out, 1985. And a lot of people still love and adore this franchise and would tout it as being one of the best 80s film, potentially one of the best movies of 1985, as well as the best time travel film. And I agree with most of that statement. It is a phenomenal time travel movie, because time travel it's finicky. It's finicky when you try to explain the science behind how time travel is made possible. In this case, it's done by this flux capacitor that requires 1.21 gigawatts of electricity or just power in order to, once it hits 88 miles an hour, to be able to move forward and back in time. And it's done with a DeLorean, which is renowned for, even by 1985 standards, to be a very terrible car that would constantly break down a lot, which is why it was heavily discontinued, which is why it's now the DeLorean, specifically that one that was featured in all three of these movies, is a high collector item where people want to own a piece of this movie to restore it back to, being functional to drive and potentially, uh, you know, mod it out to look like the exact same DeLorean in this film, and it holds up. Like I said, this film holds up. I literally just finished watching it before I came upstairs, and I loved it. And as I was watching it, it's something that I hadn't thought of before, and that is, whilst watching the first one, I I'm thinking in the back of my mind, whilst some of these scenes are playing out, um, there's two Martys here. We have the one that we follow throughout all of this film, and then the second one that we follow as he tries to fix certain aspects um, in terms of time travel shenanigans that happens in the second movie. That was a result. So technically, it hasn't happened yet, but technically, it's also still happening at the same time. You see what I mean when when you try to explain time travel? It just hurts. It just hurts my head. It's why I don't like the first Terminator film, because trying to understand timelines and time travel shenanigans just hurts my mind. Kind of makes me wonder why I'm such a fan of Doctor Who in the first place, since that also revolves around time travel. But it doesn't necessarily explain how things are able to time travel. We just follow along, essentially. But yeah, you know, the soundtrack, it's fucking amazing, and it's no wonder because the composer, Alan Silvestri, composed a lot of great movies like Predator, Predator Two. More recent stuff, he done the first Avengers movie as well as Avengers Infinity War. So a lot of great movies from the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, and even recently enough have been composed by this person, and they're the type of soundtrack that sticks with you. You could hum the main theme for these movies to just randomly on the street, and people who walk by you will be like, "Oh, that's the theme from Back to the Future," and that brings them back to a moment of potentially watching this movie as a child. And that's the legacy this film has. Nearly 40 years later, that it doesn't matter who you are, how old you are. Um, People just love this movie, and like I said, it's one of the best time travel movies out there. One of the greatest 80s movies of all time, definitely. Best movie of 1985. I don't know because I'd have to look up to see what films came out in 1985 to see that. And the story, it's interesting as well. It's basically, one of the big kind of paradoxes, not paradoxes, I'm not necessarily sure if I'd call it paradox, but basically, if you mess with time, if you mess with a kind of a fixed point in time, using Doctor Who terminology here is the only way I know how to properly explain it. Is if you mess with a fixed point in time, things are going to start unraveling, which is what happens when Marty's dad wasn't ran over by his mother's father, um, and instead it was Marty, which then resulted in Lorraine starting to have feelings for him. On But as well, and so that because of that, that's what led to his brother and his sister, and eventually him nearly phasing out of existence because he stopped that from happening. Eventually, he had to, go really, really hard to fix it, which inadvertently actually gave his father the confidence that he didn't have, because Marty had grown up hearing these stories of how the story of how his mother and father met, and then actually being there to witness it, seeing what his parents are actually like. It's different for him because he's not used to seeing them like this. Because when we see them in the beginning of the movie, George McFly is a weakling. He's allowing people to walk all over him. He doesn't have aspirations in life, and he constantly tells his kids, don't have aspirations in life because you will never achieve them. Which is why his oldest brother works at a fast food place, and it's why his mother constantly drinks because she's not happy in this marriage. But when Marty travels back in time and changes the timeline to the point which gave his father the courage to actually punch Biff, gives him that confidence that allows them to be more successful and for Biff to be less successful than what we see in the beginning of the movie. And there was one thing that I caught that I didn't catch before. It's when, in the beginning of the film, just after Einstein had traveled forward by a minute, Doc Brown mentions he wanted to go 25 years into the future, which would have been 2010, and he wanted to at least, get the knowledge of 25 years of sports betting, so that way you can travel back in time and recoup his fortune that he wasted building this time machine. Um, which is funny because that's basically the plot line of the second movie. So I'm not sure if that was the intended for it to be the plot line for the second one by the time Robert Zemeckis was writing the script. But as well, actually, one of my favorite actual scenes is just the opening scene, where we see Doc's messy place where he has certain things set in place, like a lot of those contraptions you might see on YouTube where they build it so it sets things in motion, like say steam from a kettle when it rises up, it triggers something that makes a marble roll and stuff, and it basically is set up so that Doc can have breakfast being toast, and that it feeds his dog. Um, and as well, if you pay attention, obviously as things go on, we get glimpses of what's going to happen before we see any of the characters. We know that their plutonium has been allegedly stolen, that it was denied, and then literally after Marty leaves because he's running late, we do see that Doc was the one who stole the plutonium, which is why he's been missing for the past week, is because he's setting things up. Overall, 39 years later, this movie holds up and it's an absolute great time, and I do love it. I'm not so fond of part two, which I'll explain on Wednesday. Maybe my opinions might actually change when I go to rewatch it. But one of my not so much controversial opinions, but my opinions on the franchise is I love the third movie. I absolutely love and adore it because I had watched it on repeat so much as a kid. And I believe it was actually the first in the franchise that I watched. It wasn't until rather recently, maybe 5, 6 years ago. No, yeah, about 5, 6 years ago, that I had sat down and watched the first two movies. I think I might have seen the first one at some point. I'm not 100% sure. My memory's still a bit fuzzy on that front. But it's a franchise that 40 years later, it still holds up and it's still a lot of people's favorite movie. They might have memories going to see it or renting it on VHS. Um, it was a big celebration for the franchise in 2015. That I do remember as well. So it's honestly a great film that like I said, it still holds up. So if you watched Back to the Future, let me know what you thought of it in the comments down below, and I will see you all on Wednesday for my Back to the Future Part 2 review. I'll catch you all on the next upload.